In the quiet town of Elmsworth, surrounded by vast fields and shaded groves, lived Evelyn, a woman whose life seemed, from the outside, beautifully serene. She was married to Thomas, a gentle man with a poetic soul who worked as a high school English teacher. Their house, a cozy cottage on the edge of town, was filled with the scent of coffee in the mornings and old books stacked neatly in every room. They had 2 children, and for over 12 years, their marriage looked like the picture of harmony. But Evelyn was changing. Something inside her had begun to unravel, like a thread slowly pulling loose from the seam of a beloved sweater. It wasn't that she didn't love Thomas anymore, or at least, that's what she told herself. But there was a heaviness in her chest every morning, a dull ache of something missing. Her days at the bakery she ran felt like clockwork. Every smile she gave to customers felt just slightly forced, every laugh half-hearted. It was at a local charity event that she first met Adrian. He was different from anyone else in town, a photographer who had moved from the city after a messy divorce. He was rugged, a bit older than her, with a camera always slung around his neck and stories that made her forget the world for a while. They met over a table of wine glasses and pastries, and from the first moment, Evelyn noticed how intently he listened when she spoke. Not like Thomas, who often seemed distracted, his mind lost in lesson plans or the kids' schedules. Adrian asked about her bakery, about her life, about her dreams, questions no one had asked in years. And she answered with a kind of honesty she hadn't dared use before. They laughed. They lingered. They started to see each other more often, at town meetings, at the local farmers market, at the quiet corners of the coffee shop. It started with coffee. Then conversations that stretched for hours. Then quiet walks in the forest trails just outside of town. One day, as autumn leaves fell around them, he kissed her. She didn't stop him. What followed were weeks of stolen time, moments caught between responsibility and longing. Evelyn would tell Thomas she had errands or early deliveries, and instead she would spend hours with Adrian, wrapped in arms that made her feel alive again. It was like being 20 years old and invincible. Like breathing for the first time in years. She felt guilt, yes, but it was drowned beneath the intoxicating feeling of being desired, of being seen. Thomas, not oblivious but trusting, began to notice the signs. She had changed. She wore perfume she hadn't worn in years. She smiled at her phone when she thought he wasn't watching. She seemed distant at dinner, sometimes forgetting what the conversation was about halfway through. The children noticed too. Their mother's laugh was different, their father's eyes more tired. He didn't confront her at first. Instead, he waited, hoping it was a phase, something temporary. But it wasn't. One Saturday afternoon, he followed her. She told him she was going to pick up special flour from a supplier in the next town. But Thomas drove behind her, his hands trembling on the wheel. When she pulled into a small inn off the highway and Adrian opened the door for her, Thomas felt something in his chest collapse. He didn't confront her that day. He went home, sat in the quiet kitchen and waited. She returned hours later, kissed his cheek, and told him the supplier had been delayed. He nodded, his heart hollow, and said nothing. A few days later he asked her directly, "Is there someone else?" She froze. Her hands clenched. Her lips opened but no words came. The silence was its own confession. When she finally spoke, her voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to happen. The weeks that followed were a blur of arguments, tears, broken dishes, and sleepless nights. Thomas moved into the guest room. Evelyn tried to explain that she had felt invisible, that she hadn't meant to fall for someone else, that she still loved him, but it wasn't enough. The children heard the yelling, asked questions they were too young to understand. And the town, as small towns do, began to whisper. Evelyn ended the affair with Adrian, but the damage had been done. Thomas couldn't look at her without seeing her in someone else's arms. She couldn't look at him without seeing the pain she had caused. They tried therapy. They tried co-parenting. They tried silence. Nothing seemed to mend what had broken. Then, slowly, something shifted. One night, after a particularly difficult therapy session, Thomas asked her to sit with him on the porch. They watched the stars as they used to when they were younger, before the noise of life had drowned out the simple joys. He spoke, really spoke, about how he had felt like he was losing her long before Adrian. She cried. He cried. For the first time in months, they touched, not with passion, but with understanding. They started to rebuild, not from where they left off, but from where they were. It wasn't easy. There were relapses into anger, waves of guilt, and moments where giving up seemed easier. But there were also small victories. A shared joke, a long hug, a quiet night with no arguments. Evelyn learned to live with the consequences of her choices. Thomas learned that forgiveness was a process, not a moment. Their children, resilient in ways only children can be, slowly found stability again. And in time, the town's whispers faded. They would never be the same people they were before. But maybe that wasn't a bad thing. Maybe, in losing themselves, they had found something deeper, a version of love forged not in perfection, but in truth, pain, and the decision to stay.